Stories are the most powerful thing on earth. They are literally life and death. Wars are waged based on the story of who is the hero and who is the villain. You are the result of a story your parents told each other, the one-night stand, the soulmate, and friends who became so much more. Life and death. So wouldn't you like to understand them better, these stories? How Story Works, an elegant guide to the craft of storytelling by Lani Diane Rich, demystifies stories and helps you understand why you love what you love, why you hate what you hate, and why prologues are almost always a bad idea. How Story Works by Lani Diane Rich. Available on Amazon in ebook, audiobook, and paperback form. Get your copy today.
Welcome to Still Pretty, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast from Chipperish Media. I'm story expert in a big furry hurry, Lani Diane Rich.
And I'm not unworried film scholar Noelle LaCroix, and we're here today to talk about Afterlife, the third episode of season 6.
Afterlife aired on October 9th, 2001. It was written by Jane Espenson and directed by David Solomon.
As ever, Still Pretty is a fully spoiled Buffy podcast, so if you are spoiler sensitive, consider this your spoiler warning. The thing about magic, there's always consequences. Always. Let's go on patrol. As the Scoobies move through the mean and currently on fire streets of Sunnydale, they wonder if they screwed it up and Buffy's broken. Meanwhile, Dawn brings Buffy back to the house and gets her cleaned up. Spike comes in yelling for Dawn, and then he sees Buffy on the steps. At first, he thinks she's the bot, but then he realizes it's her and can't speak for a minute. He sees her injured hands and takes her over to the couch while sending Dawn to fetch bandages. He sits with her, and she asks how long it's been.
147 days yesterday. 148 today. Except today doesn't count, does it? How long was it for you? Where you were?
Longer.
Everyone comes back and Spike leaves without a word. They crowd Buffy, asking if she's okay, asking what she needs, but all she wants to do is go to sleep. You know, which makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, jet lag from hell has got to be, jet lag from hell.
Xander and Anya leave to be confronted by Spike, who's pissed that he was left out of the loop on this one. He says that he knows why, because Willow knew that if Buffy came back wrong, she'd have to kill Buffy, and she also knew that Spike wouldn't let her. That night, Willow worries that something's wrong with Buffy. She expected Buffy to be happier, to be grateful, which, when you think about it, is solipsistic as hell, but, whatever. She and Tara go to sleep, but wake up in the middle of the night to a vision of Buffy throwing their crystal ball against the wall as she shouts at them about rattling the bones. When they turn on the lights, however, Buffy isn't there. There's no shattered glass, and the crystal ball is intact. They check in on Buffy, and she's peacefully asleep in her room.
Maybe we dreamed it. Right. Wrong. Different brains.
Willow calls Xander to tell him what happened, and while they're on the phone, Anya walks in with her eyes all white as she holds a bloody knife and cuts into her face. She drops to the floor, unconscious and unbloodied. The four meet in Buffy's backyard, trying to figure out what in the frilly heck is going on, and Buffy comes in and tells them that the night before she saw them turning to skeletons in all her photos. So, that's weird. She decides to go on patrol, and the Scoobies get to researching in the magic box. Anya delivers coffee, and Dawn's eyes go white and she yells at them, and then breathes fire all over the books. They get the fire out, and Dawn comes too.
I bet you'll experience some dry mouth.
Out on patrol, Buffy walks into Spike's crypt and he sits with her. She doesn't want to talk, so he does, and tells her about his experience since she's been gone.
But I want you to know I did save you. Not when it counted, of course, but after that. Every night after that. I'd see it all again. I'd do something different. Faster, more clever, Dozens of times, lots of different ways. Every night I save you.
Back at the magic box, Willow figures out that their spell created a demon. And sure, it wants to kill them all, but that's only for a little while. In order for it to stay, it has to kill Buffy, and
That's not gonna happen.
Thanks for the tip.
Back at Buffy's, the demon that is non-corporeal is able to smack Buffy around. Xander, Anya, and Dawn rush back while Willow and Tara do a non-euphemistic spell and make the demon corporeal, at which point Buffy cuts its head off. So, all's good?
That's probably the sort of thing I'm not supposed to see, right?
the next day, Buffy goes to the magic shop and tells everyone that she was in hell and thanks them for getting her out. When she steps out to the back alley, she finds Spike there, and they talk. She tells him that she was in heaven, that she was happy, at peace, done, complete, and she was pulled out by her friends. This is hell. She sees his stunned expression, gets up and starts to walk away, but says one last thing before walking into the sunlight, where he can't follow her.
I can never know. Never.
All right, Noelle. So, okay, I'm gonna start. Usually I ask your opinion. I'm gonna start by offering my own. Afterlife has never been my favorite episode. Now, I'm a big fan of Jane Espenson, and I do think that there are things like In a Big Furry Hurry and What in the Frilly Heck is going on. These are things that are very Espensonian. She has this wonderful play with very fun and quirky language that I absolutely adore. So that's a lot of fun. But this episode has never been my favorite. The thing I always remember from this episode that makes me look forward to it is the Spike stuff, because some of my favorite Spike stuff in the entire series happens in this episode. So knowing how I feel about Spike, that moves it up on my list of like favorite Buffy episodes. But the actual like demony stuff in here has never really felt right for me, and I've never enjoyed it that much, which is funny because this is the episode that in our notes I have like more notes than anything.
You have so many notes.
Like I've had so many ideas while thinking about this episode. So it's funny because there are some episodes that are like really super good, and then you're like, yeah, it's real good, and you don't really feel like you have a whole lot to talk about because it's just, yeah, that was great, you know.
Yeah.
But there are episodes that sometimes have a misstep that you're like, ooh, you know, what is this? Or they kind of evolve the mythology of the world, and you're like, ooh, you know, what is that? So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I always find it so interesting that some of the more mediocre episodes actually launch some of the more interesting discussions, which I'm looking forward to having. So having said that, what's your response to Afterlife?
Once again, as with many of the, to my way of thinking, mediocre episodes, it's not that the episode is just kind of meh overall. There's like high points and low points and things that I really love and respond to and things that I really don't. So yeah, I mean, there's like a lot going on here, as evidenced by our, whatever it is, 7 pages of notes.
I know.
Like usually we'll have like 4 pages of notes, and this is a lot of notes. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Spike. There's some amazing Spike in this episode. There's some not great demon stuff in this episode. Do you want to start with do we do the good news or the bad news first? What are we doing here?
You know, if you ask me, do I want to start with Spike? You know the answer is going to be like, yeah. Let's talk about Spike.
Okay,
absolutely.
yeah, I mean,
so how did you feel about the whole Spike thing?
Let's talk about Spike. So, you know, previously on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, something we didn't talk about, Spike's abject sorrow over Buffy's death.
Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't call out that shot in The Gift. I mean, there's
so much going on.
There's so much in The Gift. But in addition to that lovely, just gorgeous group shot of all the Scooby mourners and Buffy's body, it's like a Whedonian take on Michelangelo's Pietà. There's also a close-up of Spike holding his head and just sobbing.
Yeah. Which,
you know, it's really important to everybody behind the scenes that we, the audience, see this moment of his reaction, because everyone else is kind of standing there in like stunned silence, but Spike falls apart when Buffy dies. And that, I mean, we see it in the previously on in this episode, and that really informs the rest of Spike in this episode. Like it really, you see how Spike has responded and is responding to Buffy being gone. I mean, I love the way he scolds Dawn.
Yeah.
Because we know that he has made this promise to protect her, and he's going to continue to uphold that even with Buffy.
Well,
out of the I mean,
we
especially
saw that last week.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Especially with Buffy out of the picture. But he's so mad at her, and it's so cute.
Oh my God. I love it. I could rip your head off one-handed and drink from your brainstem.
He's like, yes.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's a great sort of vampiric.
You scared me half to death. Or
more to death.
I love the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, let's take a moment and talk about Spike's pain, because it is so interesting. Like, we've talked quite a bit about this development of, what does it mean to love without a soul? And is that love always going to be essentially corrupted without a soul? And the thing that's funny is that Spike, it feels like there's this transformative power to his pain, right? That instead of him, like we saw him in the beginning when he first discovered that he was in love with Buffy and had that realization, he was trying to be a good man, and there he was in Triangle when the bronze got knocked apart by Olaf the troll, right? And he's helping the bloody victims, and he's like, I didn't even taste. And Buffy's like, you want credit for that? Like, this is where we start with Spike's. The chip isn't what makes Spike good. The chip is what makes him neutered, right? But it doesn't make him good. His love for Buffy doesn't make him good and do things for others because it's best for others. If he does something for somebody else, it's because he's trying to get something from her. She dies, right? And that marks a transformational space for him, I think, which starts when he takes that beating to protect Dawn. Yeah. Right? But it is, again, that's pain. Like, there is a transformative power of pain for Spike that kind of moves him through these stages of empathy. In his review for Fool for Love over on the Passion of the Nerd YouTube channel, which I really highly recommend, Ian Martin talked about the psychologist Paul Ekman's separation of empathy into 3 basic types: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate, with cognitive being the kind of empathy that Spike has shown to date, right? He understands on an intellectual level how other people experience the world, and he uses that empathy to manipulate people. And he has been doing that since the beginning. Especially in season 4's The Yoko Factor. We see him textually using that understanding, that cognitive empathy in order to manipulate people. And lots of evil people do that. Your better psychopaths and sociopaths are excellent with that particular kind of empathy, which also allows them to pretend that they have real empathy because they do understand how you feel. It's just that at that level, they don't really care. They're using how you feel and their understanding of how you feel to manipulate and to get whatever it is that they want. The other 2 types of empathy are emotional, where you feel everything others are feeling, experiencing the world somewhat like Buffy does in Earshot. And compassionate, which is the healthiest kind, is a mix of the 2, where you can cognitively understand how people are feeling and how things look from their perspective, but you can also feel for them, but it doesn't overwhelm you. Compassionate is the healthy type of empathy. I am the emotional type. I live my life like Buffy in Earshot. I'm working on it. But as I watch this and I see Spike grappling with emotional empathy, because that is really what he has. He understands how she had to crawl out of her grave and what that feels like. He asks how long it was for her and what her experience was. He intuits when she comes to his crypt and doesn't want to talk that she can't. And so he talks, Yeah. It's so interesting to watch how his pain transforms him into this emotional empathy space where he's both got cognitive and emotional empathy, and his ability to balance them. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be, like Buffy in Earshot or like me on any random Tuesday, right? Where you're just feeling everything that everybody else feels, that gets exhausting. But he is kind of in this space. He's still essentially corrupted by the demon. He's still a monster, and we can't forget that. But the difference between, Spike in season 4 and even at the beginning of season 5 to what the pain of loving Buffy has made him feel, we are seeing him transform in a way, and the transformative power of emotional pain I find really interesting. I don't know what it means. I don't know that I have anything conclusive to say about it. But I find that so interesting in the experience of Spike, I think, which we are starting to see very textually, in this episode.
Yeah, and this is, for me, the episode where the real, a real meaningful connection between Buffy and Spike forms.
Mm-hmm,
this is where I see how they could be drawn to each other with some kind of a balanced force. And I think it's shot really beautifully. I think there's a lot in the direction, literally where the frame is. In this moment of Buffy coming down the stairs and Spike is there. So,
oh my God.
We see, as Buffy's coming down the stairs, we get this point of view shot on Spike, and the camera is sort of moving down as she's moving down. But it's really more, I call it a POV shot. It's more of an eyeline match. Because of where the frame is on James Marsters, it's closer than what her true point of view would be. That's the difference between an eyeline match shot and a point of view shot. We kind of use them interchangeably when we talk about them, but if you want to get hyper specific about it. But what's interesting to me about this shot is that it's the closest we've seen anyone in the frame so far. We're almost 8 minutes into the episode. Yeah. And we haven't been this close. The border of the border of the picture that we're seeing is so tight, and it's a weirdly tight close up. The frame cuts him off at this strange point so that the top of his head is cut off. So we don't see the top of his head, but we do kind of see more of his chest area than we normally would in a close up shot, which suggests to me that Buffy can't look him in the eye. She's highly attuned to him. She's doing that, that emotionally close-up thing that we communicate with close-up shots. But the overall effect is this kind of forced closeness between Spike and Buffy. Even before he notices her hands and makes the connection to where she was and, the origin of those injuries and what happened to her, Buffy is feeling a stronger connection to him than she's felt even to Dawn so far in this episode. Whether she likes it or not, which I really I really appreciate. I appreciate that kind of reluctance in the framing itself to make a connection with Spike, because we know how Buffy feels about Spike, or how she thinks she feels about Spike. Their relationship is already incredibly complicated, but it just got way more complicated in in this moment of recognition. And that's where for me the Buffy Spike relationship, capital R relationship, really takes off.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And this moment too, honestly, the moment when he sees her and the mix of emotions on his face, what he goes through, what James Marsters expresses in silence in this series of expressions is so unbelievably powerful. And it is honestly, in all of the run of Buffy, one of my absolute favorite moments. This is the thing that when I watch it, I stop and I go back and I watch it again and I watch it again. And I love, he thinks it's the Buffy bot, and then he realizes it can't be the Buffy bot because the Buffy bot was destroyed.
Right.
And then he sees her and has this look of wonder on his face. He can't cognitively comprehend what it is that he's seeing, but he's happy, but it's he doesn't understand. He's in shock. And it's so wonderful to see that series of emotions playing out in that silence where she can't look at him, and then he reaches out, pulls, guides her down, but doesn't touch her. He's about to touch her shoulder and then he doesn't, which I love.
It's so good. I love that moment because it's not played up in we've had this close up. We've seen him do all of this wonderful processing. We see, James Marsters does a fantastic job communicating non-verbally in this moment, but we don't have a close-up on that moment where he kind of snaps out of it, and then he's going to guide her down the stairs, and he puts his hand out to touch her shoulder, and then he realizes what he's doing, and he just like jolts his hand back.
Yeah.
It's those little physical choices that really help to tell a character's story and let the audience into their emotional landscape without any dialogue. But it's as they're moving, like, it's so subtle and so good, but so powerful.
Yeah. No, it's so incredibly wonderful. And then he sits.
Then they sit down together.
Just rests her hands in his. And the thing is that she lets him. She puts her hands in his.
Yeah.
And lets him. And they just look at each other. And she says, how long has it been? And he, 147 days, 148 today, but I guess today doesn't count, which I love. Like, he's been counting the days. And he's, how long was it for you? Right. Yeah. And that he asks her, that he is thinking about how it was for her, is the kind of thing that, yes, you would expect from somebody who loves somebody. At the same time, like, it is not the kind of thing that people who have been through that kind of pain, they tend to see things through their own, experience, which we're going to see with Willow later on, that her solipsism in this whole process is a kind of astounding, especially for Willow, but we're going to get to that in a minute. But that he has this ability to see her, and she talks to him in a way that she doesn't talk to anybody else. She basically withholds herself and keeps herself back. It's amazing.
Yeah, and in terms of the direction and the blocking here, we allow them to be a couple in this moment. I mean, they sit down facing each other. They hold hands like they're dancing, which I love. It's that kind of swing dancing handhold pose, which I just, yes, it's practical because her knuckles are all ripped up, but it's incredibly tender. And
it's
then
incredibly intimate. It is a really intimate moment between them.
And then their whole little conversation happens in that one shot. There's no close-ups. We don't move away from them. They just sit there together so that the emotional resonance is about these two characters sitting together holding hands. Yeah. Which I think I said, did I say last time that season 6 is about relationship?
Yes.
I think it is. I think not just romantic relationships, but relationships, like adult relationships. How about that? And this to me is really the beginning of a more equal relationship between the two. I mean, they're balanced in the frame. He's wearing black, she's wearing white. They're these like mirrors of each other, but also equals. And then, of course, Dawn swoops in and the group swoops in and the camera swoops away from them. It just like leaves them there.
And he just in the back of the frame just leaves.
Well, it's
like
so
we don't
funny.
make a big deal over him leaving because we've got all of this energy and focus on the Scoobies as they come in and discover Buffy, and he just quietly leaves in the background.
It's a weird bit of blocking that I noticed and just made a note of, but I don't really know what to say about, other than it feels very theatrical. They swoop in, they come in through the front door, which is in the, like, it would be the, the back of the frame. He walks toward the camera, loops around the group, and then exits behind them. And it feels very much like theater. Like we see him leave, but to the Scoobies who are focused on Buffy, he just not even kind of sweeps around, he sort of Batman's away and off to the, the outdoors where he's gonna contemplate what it means that he was left out of all of this.
Right.
Which, again, such an interesting, emotionally complicated moment.
Yeah.
And do we believe him about Willow and why he was left out? I don't know.
I think, like, I actually, it doesn't really like what he says, aside from the thing about magic is there's always consequences, always, as he leaves, as he swoops, as he Batman's out with his duster behind him, right? Yeah, like That is a moment that I think
Yes.
resonates throughout the rest of the story. Whereas this accusation that this is why he was left out, I think that we do see some evidence for that, but we don't really spend a lot of time with it. Xander asks the question later with Willow, right? And says, did you know, right? And it's not Willow who responds. It's Tara.
Yeah.
No, she's a powerful witch. She would never do anything to hurt anybody.
Which is not an answer to the question, right?
Which is not an answer to
That's
the question.
not
And
what he
then
asked.
right. And then, Willow comes in with other stuff and does not directly answer that question. So I think that textually we are given some evidence that Spike is right. And Spike's ability to, his cognitive empathy is on his cognitive empathy game is on point. This guy has been a psychopath for years, and nobody does cognitive empathy better than a psychopath or a sociopath. And that's what he's been for this whole time. That is kind of the defining characteristic of a
I don't know that
vampire.
I would diagnose Spike. I think Spike is,
yeah. No, I'm not diagnosing, I'm comparing.
I don't know that I would go there. He's definitely doing the internal push-pull of like the demon Spike and the Spike who is something else entirely that enables him to have these quote-unquote human relationships.
His own, right? He's feeling his own emotions in this moment, you know? But he's also, the thing is too, that like, I fought beside you all summer, like, that why wasn't I told? Why wasn't I in the loop? That he's upset because of this decision. Also knowing that Willow knows that if she came back wrong, Willow would have to get rid of her, and I wouldn't let her. I would stop her. So it isn't that he would have stopped her from doing the spell. We know that he wouldn't. He certainly didn't stop Dawn from trying to bring Joyce back under much more, much hairier circumstances, right? Mystically speaking, much hairier circumstances. And so we know he would have gone along with it, but he also would have, like, however Buffy came back, he would have taken her. And also, I would argue, and especially with things that as we move forward in the season, I think there's textual evidence for this, that if Buffy came back wrong, Spike would have liked that, right? It's like Frankenstein's monster wanting a monster that is like him, right? He wants Buffy in the dark with him. And when he thinks that Buffy came back wrong, what does he say to her when he can hit her? You came back wrong. This is, coming up later in the season.
Yeah.
But all of those things I think are things that Spike, if Buffy came back wrong, if Buffy came back demonic, I think that he would have taken that because it would have made her more accessible to him.
Well, he's very invested in this narrative that he's got going in this episode until that very last conversation that they are similar. The thing that sort of propels him to action in that first scene with the two of them is, I've done it. I know why her hands are cut up. I've done it myself, which has he? But anyway, doesn't matter. In the moment, he's connecting with her on this level that to him is deeply meaningful because he now feels like he has a connection to her and an understanding of her experience that no one else can have. Which is, it is interesting to see how he really wants that to be the story. He really wants that to be what she's going through. We get the Buffy Spike. It's like a 3-beat, right? We get Buffy Spike. It's like a proper 3-beat. She comes to his crypt.
Yes.
Because of course she does, right?
Because
like, who else are you going to go to? Who else are you going to go to? And he's very cute. And his you can sit down. I got furniture. you should see the downstairs. It's quite posh. Here. Like, he's been, what has he been doing? He's been fixing up his crypt while she's gone. Yeah. He's somehow.
Little Home Depot. There you go.
He's keeping house. Yeah. But at the same time, before he goes upstairs to find her there, he's punching the wall. Yeah. He is inflicting the kind of physical pain on himself that he imagines she's experiencing. And then there's that little moment where she notices. He said he is telling her she has to be careful. And she says, all she says to him is, your hands hurt. And he says, same to you.
Right.
And it's this great...
He's creating that reflection,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That there's a reflection between him and Buffy, which is always interesting when you talk about vampires and reflections, right? That they can't see themselves, but you're reflected in the people around you, right? You know, and here he is seeing himself reflected in Buffy, which I find really, really super interesting.
And wanting even more wanting even more closeness to her by way of this self-inflicted injury. It's a really... mildly disturbing moment, I think, that he's...
Right. Well, you know, I mean, he feels like he's... The difference between, like, sex and pain and violence and all of that and love, like, for Spike, I think those lines are super blurry, you know? And pain is something that he can feel and he can inflict, and he also will heal from, you know, fairly quickly. So yeah, I mean, I find it really interesting. Then, like, she comes into the crypt and she can't talk, right? So he talks.
Yeah.
And he says, you know, I'm sorry, and every night I save you, and he goes through this whole thing
doesn't
for her.
say I'm sorry, which is where I bounce in this scene.
Doesn't he? Because he says, I know I made a promise.
He says, he talks about the promise. She's not speaking. They sit down again, facing each other again.
Yeah.
Once again. And he starts to talk about the promise he made to protect Dawn. And he says, if I'd done that, you wouldn't have had to jump. And that is the moment where he has this opportunity to say, I'm sorry. And he doesn't. I mean, to my way of thinking.
He expresses, I feel like he expresses regret.
He expresses regret.
He illustrates, I'm sorry. He doesn't say it, but I think he illustrates it.
Does he, though? Because...
Every night I save you.
See, I hate that. I fucking hate that.
Really?
Yes,
okay, why do you hate that?
I like the sentiment, and I like what we learn, the audience learn about Spike in this moment, that he has been replaying this and he feels a sense of responsibility for it. But it really, to me, feeds into that it was so hard for me when you died kind of thing.
Oh, it was about me thing.
Yeah, it's very much about him and, like, his reassuring himself and her that, like, I don't know. There's something selfish about it. And obviously he's not a perfect person. Like, it is fine for him to be selfish. But for me, that every night I save you bit, I don't like it.
I love it. And to me, I think because I read it differently. Like, I read it that she's there. He sees that she can't talk, right? So he starts to talk, and that this is him, like, even though he doesn't say the words, I'm sorry, I've always read it as an I'm sorry. And that he is, and he's almost, you know, making light of it in a certain way. That he's like, I do want you to know every night I've saved you. Like, that he almost makes a joke out of the fact that every night he thinks about how he might have done it differently and how he could have done it differently. And I think that sense of his self-torment in thinking about this every single night, 147 days, 148 today, but today doesn't count. That he thinks about this and he lives in that moment and he lives in his own failure, that he is expressing his regret to her. And to me, it feels like an apology. And honestly, I think I'd rather hear that from someone who was like, it's easy to say, I'm sorry. I think it's harder to illustrate. I'm sorry. I failed you. And I'm, you know, like, this is something that I did and I feel responsible for it. And I continue to feel responsible for it. And I continue to live it. And I don't think that he's looking for absolution from her. I don't think he's looking for anything from her. And this is, and I actually wrote, like, in this fantasy, it's not about him. It's about her. It's about what he could have done to save her. Even if I didn't make it, you know, it would have been better if I had saved you, if I had not, you know, if you didn't have to jump. So I see all of that. I read that in a completely different way and I love it, but I think it's so interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about, like, the emotional resonance of individual lines and everything that surrounds them, and, like, how we interpret them. I think there's a lot with Buffy in general, but I think especially with the Buffy Spike relationship that is open to interpretation and how you receive it obviously is like we read everything through the lenses of our own experiences, right?
Absolutely.
Which is, again, I mean, partly what this episode is about, right? Like, I love that how this whole situation, we'll get to the demon in a minute, but how this whole situation looks is different to everyone based on their experiences. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I don't know. I just don't. It feels to me like he's unloading on her in that moment.
Okay, yeah. No, I think that's, I mean, clearly it's a valid read. You read it, yeah. But
what I do like about it is that he doesn't really know how to talk to her now.
Yeah.
That there's this change has happened for both of them, and she wants to be with him, apparently, but also doesn't really know what to say to him. And then he doesn't know what to say to her. And he's kind of joking at first about, you know, Willow's getting pretty powerful and it's hard to get a good night's death around her.
Right.
And the humor is just not landing. Like, he is making jokes and she's just stoic.
Well,
and
she
he's like,
can't,
well, fuck.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, she can't. I think he's just, you know.
He's scrambling because he's feeling, we know this from their previous scene together and from everything that he's said to Xander and Anya. You know, we know that he's feeling literally all of the emotions right now.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point that, like, he manhandles Xander, and if he flinches, we don't really see it. I kind of
I was thinking about that. He manhandles Xander, and, like, where's the chip now?
I mean,
you know? I mean, again, there's the thing, if he doesn't intend to do pain, although
I don't know.
Just pointed the gun. We play with the chip. We play fast and loose with exactly how well this chip works.
But what I love is that at this point, at least with Spike and Xander, like, Spike does not care if manhandling Xander gets him zapped in the head for a moment. Like, it's worth it. There's something about that I love. That with respect to Xander in particular, that Spike is just, so like,
manhandling Xander, you know, is worth it. But like, you know, killing people and drinking fresh blood is not. Like, it's not enough. You know, maybe it's the amount of pain. Maybe it's commensurate. Maybe the zap is commensurate to the amount of pain that he's inflicting, and he doesn't intend to inflict pain on Xander at that moment. He just wants to shove him up against a tree, right? So no, that's interesting.
But then beat 3, Spike and Buffy in the daylight, which I mean.
In the daylight. This beat is so beautiful. And I think my favorite part of this beat, she comes out and he says, oh, you know, I'll go. And then goes to the edge of the darkness, the edge of the shadow, right? Goes to the edge of the shadow and looks into the light.
Literally toes the line.
Literally
toes the line.
And then she says, it's okay. I can be alone with you here. Which to me, as I'm reading, of course, everything through the lens of our own experience. And on the one sense, I can be alone with you here is like, okay, you know, I guess, right?
Which is
like,
his response. He's like, oh, thanks a lot.
He says, oh, I see. I always read it as thanks ever so, you know, because he's like, now I don't have to step into the sunlight and dust myself, which I would do for you, my lady. You know, this kind of thing.
I would dust myself at a moment's notice to say the word.
For your convenience, yes. But there's also something about the idea of I can be alone with you here. Which on the one hand, it says I can, like, part of why Buffy is comfortable with Spike, part of it is that he's the only one she doesn't care what he thinks or how he feels. Like, she doesn't care. So she doesn't have to be careful around him, you know?
Yeah.
But there's also something about the kind of real communion, you know, that you can have with somebody else where you're so comfortable with them that even when you're with them, you can feel as comfortable as you feel alone. Now, I think that for people who, I think maybe not everybody has this kind of experience, but like for me, as somebody with, you know, the very damaging and not at all, you know, doesn't at all speak to my character, emotional empathy, right? That like I am constantly like putting feelers out when I'm with anybody. How are they feeling? How are they responding? What's going on? What are the expressions? Like, it's this constant emotional calculus that is going on in my head for me to like understand what's going on with them and how they're feeling. And if they're not feeling great, if they're, you know, having a bad time, I feel that, and that makes me less able to be present for them, you know? So yeah, my emotional empathy is not like a great thing about me. So for me, like, even though I'm an extrovert and I get my energy from being around people, I have to be by myself a lot of the time because it's just too fucking exhausting. So for me, if I was able to sit with somebody and be alone with them there, like that would be something that I would have to be so comfortable with them. I would have to trust them so much that I don't have to do that constant emotional calculus, right? So for me, when I read that line, I read it as, oh, like, how touching is that? Now, that may not be, I don't think it's the way Buffy means it. And I think it's kind of more of an insult, probably, that like, I so don't care about you, that it doesn't bother me, you know, that you're here. Like, you don't count as human to me, you know? It's a but I read line. It with that, like, I read it in this, like, oh, you know, and that may just be, again, that's my lens.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely, I think it's my favorite line. I think it's my favorite moment in this episode. It's okay. I can be alone with you here is incredibly powerful because what she wants in that moment is to be alone. I can have what I want with you here. I can be like, she wants to be alone because she feels out of sync with her friends.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. And in this moment, she's just lied to them. Yeah. So I can be alone with you here is also, I don't have to, I can be unself-conscious. Yes. I can feel whatever it is that I am truly feeling and not put up this front of, you know, trying to be
that
happy and gratitude. Yeah, that's true.
It's
intimacy.
Such an incredible moment of intimacy. And I love it. And then she tells him.
Then she tells him the truth.
The truth, you know? And I love it. She tells him the truth. Then she walks into the light where he cannot follow her. They can never know. And then just walks away. And that choice for her to leave all of this in the shadow with him, I love that scene. And that's why when we talk about Afterlife, and we are going to talk about the sucky stuff in just a little bit when we get to the demon, but when we talk about Afterlife, like, this is the stuff that makes this one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah. I mean, I said it at the top of the show. Like, the powerful stuff in this episode is really powerful. It's real good.
Yes.
It's real good. And for me, I mean, I'm coming down on it. Like, this is the beginning of a true relationship for Buffy and Spike, and it's kind of like, all right, here we go.
A relationship in which Buffy is actually participating.
Yes.
Like, up until now, Buffy has not participated really in this relationship. It has been, he is useful. When he is useful, I will call him to me, you know. But it has been very much a general soldier kind of relationship, you know. And how he felt about her, you know, wigged her out a little bit. But it wasn't something that she was overly concerned about. And she's still not overly concerned with how he feels about her. Right now, his ability to see her, because he is the only one who really sees her in this episode. Yeah. That is something that that I think she is just deeply, deeply responding to, and is so traumatized by this whole thing that having somebody there who can A, understand it, and B, whose opinion you don't really care about. She doesn't care what he thinks about her.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's so interesting. But moving on to the things that, like, are maybe not as great. Let's talk a little bit about this demon metaphor.
Oh my God. Oh boy. Okay. Oh boy. Let me just scroll through 75 pages of notes and find
I know, we had so much about this.
Okay. Yeah. Well, because at first, this demon is kind of monster of the week.
Yes.
Except that it's not, because it is textually connected to this super big, powerful, really questionable spell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I find fascinating about the way the demon is brought into the episode is that the first evidence of the demon, maybe, is the faces in Buffy's photos turning to skeletal faces.
Right.
But this could also be Buffy's attempt to reconcile her current situation with her new and complicated relationship to mortality, maybe?
I think that's a really nice, interesting read of that, which I really would have loved if that was textually what it meant. But basically, the show is using the music and all the cues, to say that this is the first sign of the demon. Like textually, I would say that the show intends that to be the demon, but it is the only time that the demon is expressed in this particular way. And this demon really is the Swiss Army knife of demons. Like it presents in whatever way we want it to. Like, there's nothing consistent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the demon seems to know, like the demon has knowledge of the spell because the demon is from the spell. I mean, when the demon as Buffy appears to Willow and Tara, it's apparently referring to Willow's killing of the fawn. When it says, did you cut its throat? Did you pat its head?
Yeah. It's weird. And the thing is that, again, here's our Swiss Army knife, right? So we have this demon possessing others, right? And they do the same thing and they say the same thing. And Dawn even spits fire for reasons of I don't know. But when
just
it's Buffy,
up the from hellness of it,
right.
I guess.
But when it's Buffy, it's just a shared hallucination that it is giving to both Tara and Willow. And so why is it a hallucination in some circumstances, but actual possession of people in others? I don't understand why when it's why can't it just hang out and watch? It knows what's going on, right? It's slithering this subcutaneous, blob underneath all the surfaces, right?
Yeah.
That it can just hang out there and listen. It doesn't need to pop into Xander and say, thanks for the tip, because why does it need to tip them off that it knows now how it gets better? Like that's not something from the demon's perspective that really works toward its goals, So it is such a weird demon that does whatever we want it to do in any particular moment, but there is nothing consistent about it, which makes it harder to kind of suss out what the actual metaphor of this thing is.
I mean, I like kind of, sort of, that when it's not embodied, the demon is the slithering lump that's kind of reminiscent of the crawly things under Willow's skin during the spell.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, as far as special effects go, like visually, it's not my favorite. But I think it's great foreshadowing for the kind of thing this is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when all you have is a hammer, every demon looks like a subcutaneous lump.
I mean,
yeah. If that's what you've got all, queued up in your After Effects, you're just like, why don't we make it a lump?
Trick.
Like we did. We already did it for Willow's arms. Let's use it again because we spent a lot of time on this. Let's use it.
We learned this trick. Yeah. Let's do it again.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, okay. So what I like is that the demon was made by the spell. So it knows the questionable nature of the spell. Right? So like Dawn asks why, if they made the demon, can they not see it? They just see themselves, quote unquote, doing stuff. And I want to say, because the metaphor works better that way. Like what they're seeing is themselves doing stuff, because that is the problem, right? Like that is the shadow side of this whole Buffy resurrection plan. But I learned something about myself with this episode. And that is that when it comes to explanations for supernatural things, I am incredibly inconsistent. Willow's explanation of what the demon is in this episode seems to undermine the metaphor a little bit for me. And I'm almost bummed that it didn't just like remain a mystery so that we could wonder about the demon as some sort of shared anxiety.
Yeah.
Because
the manifestation of anxiety. Sure.
Like Willow, because Willow is all upset over why, if everything went so well, is Buffy not happy? And Buffy has this anxiety that the demon itself later articulates when it says, you don't belong here.
Right.
So I'm like, you know what? Just leave it. Just like, let it be a mystery here. But when the knights of business in the front, party in the back are like, Glory has to share the body of a human male infant. I'm like, hold on. Explain how. How does that work? So there you go. I am terribly inconsistent with my demand for details and or explanation. That's
all right. I would actually argue that you're not, and here's why. Glory and Ben's shared existence doesn't really work as a metaphor. It's not presented as a metaphor. It's an explanation of a story device used to show why Glory isn't always around, and like what's going on with that. And to have that moment of when we see that Glory is Ben and Ben is Glory, right? So, but the thing is, it's also a body thing with Glory and Ben. It's this very physical thing, and you have knowledge of and a tremendous amount of curiosity about the body. So you would naturally ask those questions and need more and be like, well, whatever the fuck with this, right? But the demon, which is basically a multidimensional lanyap, has all the hallmarks of a good metaphor. So in your brain, you snap it into that place, something you're willing to accept because a metaphor doesn't have to make logical, like physical sense. It just needs to be consistent. And I would argue that this one is not consistent. So I question it a lot. Meanwhile, with Glory and Ben, I'm just like, whatever. They share a body. All right, fine. Right? So like you and I are actually like a reverse of that.
I think
because of the things,
it's a reversal.
Right, because of the things that we are personally like interested in and knowledgeable about. And for me, it's story devices, and for you, it's the body and the physical experience, which I think is so interesting because I never think about the body and physical experience until you start talking about it on this show. And I love it because now I will. So it's awesome.
So then we have a demon that doesn't have a body.
Right.
Until but it has to be given one so that Buffy can defeat it. And I mean, I like it. Yeah. And I'm so curious about this demon, right? Because it tells Buffy you don't belong here, which is true.
Right.
So is everything the demon says true? I mean, it's mean because it's a demon, but like, is it?
Well, yeah.
Is it right? Like, is it correct?
Demon subscribes to the brutal honesty thing, which people subscribe to when they are more interested in brutality than honesty. But still, yes.
Also, P.S. female demon or feminine. A feminine
presenting demon, which I think is interesting, and is that because it was created through feminine power and in relation to a feminine presenting, Buffy.
I mean, it's a specifically like we talk up the Willow centricness of this spell, right? Like this is Willow's power, this is Willow's idea. It's it's a big deal for her specifically. Yeah. In a selfish way. And then it becomes about her ego in this episode when she's wondering why Buffy isn't grateful. But then there's also, Buffy's anxiety about here I am, like I was somewhere where I felt whole despite being incorporeal, and now I'm here in this body, but I'm no longer whole. Like there's metaphor potential there.
There is. It's a little muddy, and I think like actually it's funny because I actually use this demon a lot when I'm talking about like particular psychological things, like when you talk about something that is bothering you or the trauma that you're processing or whatever, you make it corporeal, right? And then you can fight it, but you can't fight it until you have given it form, until you have like looked at it and figured out what it is, and it's funny because I had a recent experience with that like just last week where I was explaining that to somebody and I was like, that episode of Buffy, and of course he did because he's my friend. So yeah, it's really kind of funny. I love that part of the metaphor that you can't fight something until you give it form. You can't fight something until you understand its edges, right? And so being able to make it corporeal and then she can fight it, I think is actually really, really cool. But the rest of the demon, though, is so inconsistent. It's both physically real and yet hallucinatory in nature. And so I I don't particularly care for it. But there was a thing that you said, like one of my favorite things to do as a story expert is like when something doesn't work, find a way. How would I make it work? How would I do this? You know, how can you fix it, right? I love the fix it game. And then there was a thing that you said about their anxieties, about manifestations of their anxieties, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's a manifestation. So it tells the demon tells the truth, apparently, but it seems to be telling everyone their own anxieties about their current situation. Yeah. So, you know, like it tells Willow and Tara, basically, you fucked with forces that you shouldn't have. Right. And it tells Buffy, you don't belong here. You weren't given a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
All true. Yeah. Like really true.
And it's really interesting. And I absolutely love this idea. And so when I was thinking about how I would fix it, I stole that and I hope that's okay. Because the thing is that manifestation of anxiety is different from manifestation of fears, like we've seen in episodes like Nightmares and Fear itself, right? Anxiety is quiet. Anxiety whispers. Anxiety gets you like a fear. You might have a fear of something external happening to you, of, you know, somebody like killing you or hurting you or having to be in a play that you are entirely unprepared for, which we know Willow is very afraid of. But anxiety attacks from within. Anxiety gives you doubt. Anxiety, you know, like messes with your head. So it gets you inside at your core. And most of all, it isolates you and gets at you when you're alone, making you more alone. But this thing has shared hallucinations, which are essentially communal, and community is a source of comfort. You know, your community, your people are a source of comfort. So the very fact that these hallucinations are shared, and that part of the demon exposition here is that if Buffy dies, it gets to be a real boy, then the demon whispering in everyone's ears that Buffy came back wrong and they must kill it, that's speaking to anxiety, like especially Willow. So if that's what the demon was doing, you know, was whispering that doubt into Willow that she was going to have to do it, it would be really interesting. It would also ignore Buffy, right? Because it doesn't, it's not concerned with Buffy. It would isolate her while having all the shared hallucinations with everybody else, or having the whispering with everybody else. Then that makes sense out of Spike's speech to Xander, which just sort of sits there and we don't really do that much with it. If Willow knew that if Buffy came back wrong, she'd have to kill her, and she knew that Spike wouldn't let her, that pulls that back in, right? So this is how I would do it, right? Okay. You have Buffy come back. Act 1 is pretty much the same, except as they're walking in the alleyway, we hear something like a whisper. We maybe don't hear what it says, but we hear something like a whisper. We see an expression on Willow's face, maybe some sort of very subtle visual effect, you know? And then Willow says that was Buffy, right? And somebody else says, or something that looks a lot like her, so that we're sowing that doubt and that anxiety, right? Yeah. Then when Willow and Tara are talking that night, you would get the same visual effect in the whispering sound. And Tara asks, are you worried she didn't come back right? And we see that doubt in Willow's eyes after hearing this idea presented from Spike, that Willow knew that she might have to kill Buffy, right? And the thing is that suggestion in stories are an incredibly powerful device, because humans are hardwired to find patterns. So when a pattern is presented to us, we lean into it and try to discern. So that's why if you just leave little breadcrumbs for, you know, as writers, any of the writers out there, leave little breadcrumbs for your audience, hinting at what is there, rather than explicitly stating what is there, you know, because we are going to put those pieces together. And I think that would have been more powerful, to have this suggestion of what this thing is doing, rather than this, you know, subcutaneous lump or whatever the hell that is. So you've got Willow, and we're getting a sense, because we just heard what Spike said, that she is prepared to kill Buffy if Buffy came back wrong. So here we are. The Buffy bot is gone. We finally got Sarah Michelle Gellar back. And the idea that they could kill her again is going to be really horrifying, right? You know? Right. But we also know that Spike's ready to protect Buffy, even if she did come back wrong. And there I point to my argument textually throughout the rest of the season that he actually would have liked that, because it would have kept her in the dark with him. And I think that even if she wasn't the Buffy that he fell in love with, that he would still remain, like he would like that because it would, instead of forcing him into the light, which we see that interplay at the end of this episode, right? Instead of forcing him into the light where he can't be, he could bring her into the shadow because she can
keep her in the darkness with him forever.
Yes, exactly. So I think that he would have actually been okay with that, which is another reason why he wouldn't let Willow kill her if she did come back wrong. So here we have this like setup of two sides within this Scooby group, right? Then you bring in Xander's doubts about Willow, which we do have textually expressed in this episode. His worries that Willow was prepared to get rid of Buffy if it went sideways, and he'd be with Team Spike. We protect Buffy, right? Anya, ever the pragmatist, would want to get rid of Buffy if Buffy was going to kill them all, and that would have sowed some wonderful conflict between her and Xander, which I would have liked to see. Also could nicely feed into Hell's Bells later in the season. Plus Tara, we've got Willow's side, right? Because it's Willow. But Tara starting to question and wondering what the actual fuck, right? You know? Then Dawn, who would be completely unwilling to even consider the idea. So you'd have Dawn with Spike and Xander, and then you've got Anya and Willow and Tara on the other side, and you got Buffy in the middle, right? You know, and I like the idea of we've got this, you know, like Marvel Civil War, kind of like where we've got this group that's like fighting each other, you know, and then Buffy in the middle and kind of being on Willow's side. Can you imagine in the middle of all of this if she just stands there ready to let Willow kill her because she wants to go back? And not saying that, not expressing that explicitly, but we see her not fighting to live, not fighting to stay. And Dawn would see that too. And Dawn's going to fucking notice that shit, right? You know?
Oh, yeah.
So then you have Dawn be the one who figures out the Tomogenesis because Dawn's experiences have made her grow up fast, you know, and she's the only one it can't whisper to because she has no fucking time for it. And I would give cash money for a scene where Dawn storms into Willow's room with a book and says, "You undo it this way," and explaining it and saving Buffy through that, and Dawn being the one who saves Buffy.
Which would be so dope because Dawn has been interested in witchcraft all along.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a bit of Willow in Dawn. I think you can see some, you know, some resonances there, you know? So like if that had been this episode, it would be one of my favorite episodes in the whole thing. The idea of the manifestation of anxiety, and anxiety manifests within us, not outside of us. Fears are things we're worried about, like outside of us, right? But the anxiety is within us, you know? And to turn them all against each other, then what Spike says to Xander makes sense. That Xander's on Spike's side would be really interesting, that there would be this, you know, conflict between Anya and Xander and putting them on different sides of this thing. I love all of that. And then Dawn being the one to come in and save the fucking day because her sister is not going to die again, you know? What do we say to the god of death, Dawn, right? You know? So yeah, like I thought about that whole thing, and your idea about these anxieties, the manifestation of anxiety, just loved it. It's so brilliant. And I think that would make that so much better. And then at the end, we can still have the make it corporeal and you can fight it. Right. So once we get over this whole thing, they do the same thing. They do the same, you know, Willow and Tara do the same spell. They make the demon corporeal. Buffy kills it, you know, because she sees Dawn's response, you know, to the idea of her wanting to die. And when we see her not fighting in that one moment and being like, yeah, go ahead. You know, like, I mean, that would be really disconcerting too. I think it would work so much better. So yeah, I would have really enjoyed that.
It's all fixable. It's all fixable.
Most everything is. I mean, this is like all, you know, let me just say Monday morning quarterbacking. It is a lot easier to take something that somebody else created and fix it than it is to create something in yourself. And I know I've said this a million times, but when it comes to creator and critic, creator wins every day, twice on Sundays. I just want to say that. So it's like, it's not easy to write on a TV show or to do it at this schedule, the kind of hectic schedule that they've got. I've had 20 years to think about this episode. They had like a week to write it. So all of that said, I want a little bit of that in there as I come in here and Monday morning quarterback and say, this would have been so much better if I'd written it. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't, because I would have fucked up other stuff. And I might not have seen this either. Like, you know, it's just, it's very, very hard to do that stuff. So I just want that said. It's fun to Monday morning quarterback, but it is so much easier than everything else involved in creating anything. So anyway, that's it.
Anyway.
Yes.
But like speaking of writers and what they're doing and what they're setting up, I'm gonna throw out one of those wild, still pretty theories.
I love it.
Okay.
I love
Here it goes. Goes like this. Afterlife marks the point on Buffy when the Willow-Tara relationship breaks.
Yes.
And of course it breaks during a spell.
Right.
So
right.
You mentioned Tara a moment ago and how she is deeply Team Willow in this episode, but there's also those doubts creeping in, right? Like she's so sweet and tender with Willow when they're alone together at bedtime. And she says, it doesn't all have to be good and fine. This is the room where you don't have to be brave, and I still love you. If you're worried, you can be worried.
Oh my God. Okay, we talk about all the great Spike stuff, but this is such a wonderful thing for Tara to say. Tara is so Team Willow that I think Tara is almost not Team Tara.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
For sure.
Yeah.
Like Tara gives Willow this wonderful, like, there's this wonderful bid for connection.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell me and I still love you. She is ready for this, you know, like all of the uncertainty and anxiety that Willow might be feeling. And then it doesn't show up in that way, right? It shows up as Willow being like, well, but I did the right thing and Buffy's not happy. Which...
Yeah, Willow's solipsism there is kind of amazing.
I mean, I understand it. This is, I mean, we'll get into this.
Especially because if you're thinking about ring theory, right?
Yeah.
There's the person who's traumatized, and you can speak to the people who are outside your ring. And I think it would go Tara, Willow, you know, Buffy. And I think that's okay, right? But I think that perspective, though, seeps in when she's talking to Buffy as well.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and it rubs off on everyone else too, right? They're like, you know, but like, like you're home, be happy.
Yeah.
Like literally they say,
yeah,
you can be happy now. And,
right.
Like, what?
How did they expect her to be happy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so Willow and Tara are like kind of, you see them kind of in sync, kind of not. As Tara is inviting Willow to kind of share a little bit more about what she's feeling and what she's going through. And you can see Willow holding back a little bit. You know, Tara has to kind of push her to get the connect, you know, the information out of her, the feelings out of her. And then, you know, when they figure out what the demon is, when Willow figures out what the demon is, Willow and Tara explain together how it works and, you know, what it's called. And off screen, they craft this badass spell to make the thing corporeal so Buffy can fight it. And I say badass because the spell is long.
Yeah.
And it is wordy and it rhymes like crazy. And they are in it together. They are totally in sync. Until Willow closes her eyes and effectively leaves Tara by letting go of her hands. I mean, we know the power of hand-holding in this relationship. We've seen it multiple times with these two. And then Willow jumps to the end of the spell with those all black eyes again and just says solid, which does it. One word does it. But it's clearly not the spell that Willow and Tara intended to cast.
Yeah.
And it's also pointedly Willow acting on her own. She has literally broken contact with Tara in order to skip to the end of this spell and do it herself. Rather than work as a team, which speaks to, I think, the beginning of the end of this relationship.
Right.
I mean, they're definitely seeding the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
And specifically the way in which powerful magic and Willow's relationship to her magic will supersede her relationship with Tara and separate her from her friends. And I think it's done really, really well.
I think so too. Here's the thing that I find interesting though. Like you were saying last week that it didn't seem consistent to you that Tara would go along with Willow's plan, like especially after everything that we set up in Forever, and she was objecting to Dawn trying to bring Joyce back, and Willow, of course, at that point lied about having helped Dawn get the books, And when Xander asked Willow if she knew what might happen in this episode, that Buffy might come back wrong, Willow doesn't answer. We talked about that. Tara defends her. No, Willow is a talented witch and she would never do anything to hurt anyone. All of this. And I think that, as we move forward in the season, we go to the end of All the Way, which is right before the events of Once More with Feeling, that Willow has used this spell to make Tara forget their fights and to make Tara forget her her objections. What if at the end of All the Way that isn't the first time that Willow had done that? And I think that to me I see Willow basically saying that her judgment supersedes Tara's when she secretly gives Dawn the book to lead her to the spell for Joyce and lies to Tara about it. So for me, like that is the moment for me when Willow and Tara start to fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Tara does seem increasingly out of sync with her own, like what we know of Tara. And it does suggest that, and it doesn't even have to be magical manipulation.
Yeah.
Like it could just be power imbalance in the relationship and what happens when one person is dominant over the other in a way that is pervasive and effective.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it makes me so sad. As much as I love the relationship, the growing relationship between Willow and Magic, and how complicated that is for her because she feels so great about it.
Right.
And we'll see, I don't know if it's next week or the week after, that horrible, horrible conversation with Giles.
Oh, yeah.
Where that she knows that he's right, but she just wants somebody on her side about how great it feels to be this powerful. It's rough.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to see like when that relationship starts to fall apart. But there was also something that you were talking about in your notes that I thought was really interesting. We were talking about like through the looking glass. So what do you got on that?
Okay, so there mirrors and the idea of mirroring. I mean, we've talked a little bit about mirroring with Buffy and Spike and that relationship. But we also get some actual mirrors in this episode in a way that I think is interesting and meaningful. Another one of the things that we haven't talked about that appears in the previously on is Buffy coming back into her body. And yeah, here I go with the physical body stuff, right?
I love it. I love that you do this because I never think about it. It's always so interesting.
So we see Buffy coming back into her body in her coffin after her body comes back from having decomposed.
Yeah.
Like it's actually pretty brutal. It would be like that alone is some really significant gnarly magic, but the special effect also suggests that it all happens simultaneously. So Buffy's soul, her essence, her consciousness, whatever, comes back into her body as her body is recomposing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting, like, it's a neat special effect. I go back and watch it if you haven't seen it recently. But then Buffy spends a good chunk of this episode looking at herself in the mirror. I mean, she hasn't seen herself in the mirror for almost 5 months for a number of reasons, right?
Yeah, longer for her, right?
Yeah, true. She has no real concept of time. Wherever she was herself, but formless. I think that's important to our understanding of like her relationship to her body and mirrors. In this episode, I mean, she seems to be revisiting the mirror stage of Lacanian psychoanalytic theory. the relationship between the imaginary and the real, and, theory that's over 100 years old and has been, reimagined and disproven many times, but continues to hold a special place in the hearts and minds of film theorists, because film theory and psychoanalytic theory just love to get all enmeshed and creepy, and it's wonderful. But anyway, more directly, Buffy is experiencing self-consciousness again. And I don't mean that in the critiquing of her body sort of way. I mean, being able to look into a mirror and see this whole complete form that is effectively objectified in the mirror. That over there is me.
Yeah.
It's a gnarly psychological space to be in.
Yeah.
And then we go from Willow saying, she's fine, she's normal, she used to go to bed all the time, which I really enjoy.
Yes.
She's back to looking in the mirror in a different room of the house. I really wish that we had a mirror 3 beat. I really do, because it is so crucial to our understanding of like where Buffy is now as opposed to where she was. And I think maybe the 3 beat is meant to be when she opens up to Spike, but that doesn't quite work because there's no visual of the mirror. But this idea of like traveling through the frame of the mirror into a sense of her body as embodied. And of course we have a demon that can't be fought until it's embodied again. Big metaphor, big imagery that we didn't quite explore fully, but there's something really creepy about this idea that Buffy has to reckon with her physical body again. And off the top of my head, I can't remember if we addressed that later in this season. We hear her say that wherever she was, she thinks she was in heaven, that she was not, she didn't have a physical form, but she was still herself.
Right.
So bringing the consciousness back into the physical body, I don't know. There's something there. And then
That's
of course,
interesting.
Yeah. And then of course our physical bodies are the ways, the only way in which we have to be in community and in relationship with other people. And there's something here. There's something going on here. That's all I like got.
It. Hold on to that though. As we move through the season, keep an eye out for how mirrors are used, because, one of the things that, like we were talking about how Spike has no reflection, right? But he sees himself reflected in the people. Everybody sees themselves reflected in the people around them. And Buffy can, like, when she goes to the crypt, there's no mirror there, but she sees herself reflected in Spike, who has a reflective injury that he has actually put on his own hand. There's something there. I think there's definitely something there. I think it's really interesting. So keep an eye on that as we move through the season, because it's going to be really, really interesting. I'm interested in that kind of perspective on it. But for right now, I think we're about ready to finish this up. So Noelle, what was your favorite part?
Oh man, it's a tie for me. It's either Spike noticing Buffy's hands and knowing what it means, or it's I can be alone with you here.
I can be alone with you here is so good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
What about you? What's your favorite part?
When Spike sees Buffy. I honestly, out of the whole show, that is like one of my top 5 like favorite moments in all of Buffy. When he sees her again, realizes it's her, that wash of emotions over his face is just unbelievable. So good.
If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, connect with the show on Twitter. Follow @Chipperish and use the hashtag StillPretty.
This episode of Still Pretty was brought to you by the Chipperish media producers who support us on Patreon at the power producer level. These people are the reason why Still Pretty is coming to you free and ad-free right now. So thank you to our September producers, Abigail, Alice, Erica, Rose, Jonathan, Kristen, Sarah, and Shelley. And this week's special message for our power producers: it doesn't have to be all good and fine. This is the room where you don't have to be brave, and I still love you.
To find out how you too can support Chipperish Media, visit patreon.com/chipperish. Other ways to show your support: write a great review on Apple Podcasts, tell your friends about the show, or leave a hole in the middle of some soggy group hug.
We'll be back next time with Flooded, the 4th episode of Season 6. Until then, it's hard to get a good night's death around here.